Hello. How are you? I've mentioned a few times on this channel my personal reading record and the origin story behind that. You can learn more in my booktube newbie tag video, but I'm not sure if I've mentioned the absolute storm of chaos surrounding it. Prior to this year, 2017 was the year where I read the most books. But how did I get here? And how did my expectations for the following years crash in a blaze of... not glory? If you want to know the full story, strap your butts in. Oh, and while I'm thinking about it, if you want more book talk and artwork and other stuff from me, make sure you like and subscribe. Before I start talking, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while now, and I knew I wanted to do a drawing to accompany it, as some people do with their Storytime videos, but I wasn't sure who to draw. Then I made my decision. This time I decided to draw my character Emmerich because he's a bookworm and the grumpiest deer man you'll ever meet, which was basically my mood for much of the time when this story takes place. So, honestly, he fits the bill, and it's kinda disturbing how well he fits the bill. Okay, back to the story. This tragedy of error started in 2016, when tiny fetus me was in my first year of college. Well, okay, I'd been reading for years before that, and if you ask my parents, they'll tell you I started reading at an age where I probably shouldn't have been able to read. I grew up reading on occasion, and it was a habit that really picked up in high school, which serves kind of as a sort of prequel for the beginning of the story. Anyway. Of course, being in college meant that I was a very busy person, but even during my summer break, I couldn't be bothered to read anything. I had to force myself to read, and it would take me months to read a book from beginning to end. Simply put, there were other things that had my attention, and I finished the year having read only 3 books. Of course, I wasn't very happy with this, and I thought, man, something has to change. And so I set out to read whenever I had a shred of free time. Waiting for class, during breaks, whenever I didn't have any homework to do. And this worked out very well for me. For a time. I started to keep track of what books I read and when and how many I was reading. Of course, it was nothing crazy like a 600-page book in 5 hours, but I was reading at a much faster pace than I was the year before. And I think what really helped was that I challenged myself to read at least 50 pages a day. 2017 was an excellent reading year for me. There were some flops, of course, which is pretty much guaranteed, but I also came across some great books and found my first 5-star read, probably ever, Malice by John Gwynne. That book slaps, by the way. By the end of the year, I had read 32 books, a personal record that would be unmatched for 5 years. As anyone would be in this scenario, I was excited. Very excited. Then 2018 came around, and my very first thought was, I'm gonna try and beat that. I think I made my personal goal 35 books? No big deal. Or so I thought. I'm not sure what happened, but that year just hit different and not in the way I wanted. Maybe I caved under my own expectations, or maybe it was my increase in schoolwork, but I didn't beat my record and I finished the year with 27 books read. And then I got mad. Mad that I couldn't even meet my expectations, but also mad at myself for pretty much the same reason. You ever go into the new year all excited to do something and fail to do that anyway? Yeah. 2019 didn't fare much better for me either. In fact, I did worse that year. Despite the fact that I should have learned my lesson from 2018 and that I should have stepped back to analyze my limits and my potential, I set out to do the most ambitious thing my brain has ever thought up. Read every book that was currently sitting on my shelf. Maybe if I force myself to read more, I'll do just that, I said. Easy peasy, I said. I think you can guess where this is going. 2019 was, yeah, it was a bad reading year. There were some silver linings to this year, however, and one of those was my introduction to the Licanius trilogy with the first book, The Shadow of What Was Lost. That series would go on to become one of my favorites of all time. Other than that, though, I can't really say anything else good about that reading year, even though I had a great year otherwise. Almost half the books I read were DNFs, though this wouldn't hold a candle to how things would go further down the road. But I digress. Maybe it was bad luck, maybe it was because the books I DNF'd were actually bad. Who knows? Either way, as time went on, my love of reading took more and more of a nosedive, and the thing I used to love doing became overshadowed by the weight of my own expectations. And then came the dumpster fire that was 2020. Man, wasn't that the best time of our lives? Anyway, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, then came 2020. The year where everything, invariably and without question, went straight to hell. And no, this isn't up for debate, and I think we all know why. At this point, I could feel a reading slump coming on, and I tried to stave it off by starting the year with a book I knew I would enjoy. And I actually gave it 5 stars, but it seemed the reading slump was inevitable. Of the 23 books I read that year, more than half of those were DNFs. Yeah, I'll let you sit on that for a moment. Aside from my spectacularly crap luck at the time, I distinctly remember my impatience and also my expectations making it worse. Again. Why couldn't I find a good book? Why was everything going down the toilet? Why couldn't I bring myself to read like I used to, and why were there squirrels outside eating my spaghetti? Okay, that last one didn't actually happen, and I suppose I have an answer to one of those questions already, but by the middle of the year, my reading slump hit full force, and it was at this time that I fell out of love with reading and saw it as a chore more than anything else. I put reading to the wayside because at the time, I thought there were a million other things I could do that would be a better way to spend my time. My mind would just be like, why read if I know I'm going to hate the experience? And for a while, hate the experience I did. My reading slump continued through all of 2021 when I only read 10 books. Well, okay, the only part is subjective because I know that's a lot of books to some people, but when you put that next to the 32 books, yeah. In spite of the slight hope that it would get better, my reading slump didn't let up at all. To hit 50 pages in one sitting now seemed equivalent to running a marathon when 4 years before it was a piece of cake. And it also didn't help that I was seeing other people read 10, 11, 12 books a month. I remember there was a stretch of time where I thought, why can't I be like that? And that, along with everything else I mentioned, seemed to have destroyed my love of reading for good. Well, so I thought. If this whole story has sounded depressing, don't worry, it gets better. At the beginning of 2022. I went into the year still in a reading slump, but it was around the time I started my channel that I had a realization. For context, this epiphany sort of ties back to something my dad said to me back in 2017 when I still enjoyed reading. Basically, he said, why should it matter how many books you read? Just enjoy the book. And honestly, truer words have never been spoken. Why should it matter how many books I read, and why have I been spending years working myself up over this when it was unnecessary to do so? So I sat myself down, not really, but you get what I mean, and said something has to change, because if nothing changes, this is gonna get worse. I didn't want to abandon reading entirely, and actually part of the reason I started my channel in the first place was so I could attempt to mend my relationship with reading and have the chance to get my thoughts on books out there. There were multiple changes to my reading schedule structure thing, but the biggest one was just read something. It doesn't matter what it is. Don't force yourself to read, find the time to do it. And unlike previous years, I have done away with reading goals because my relationship with such a thing has gone so far down the drain that I'm almost positive I would self-destruct if I tried that again. And that's been going very well for me, actually. It's extremely refreshing to just have, like, no goals looming over you for the entire year and to put no pressure on yourself when it isn't needed. Just enjoy the book. And now we're here, in the present. On the matter of reading, I feel much better now, though the reading slump never really went away entirely, and there are still some days when I find something else more interesting. But I guess that's normal, isn't it? These days, instead of trying to power through something, I just cut my losses and move on, and celebrate my victories every time I finish a book. And bonus points if it's a book that I like. So, moral of the story is, don't be like me, I guess. But I guess there's one other thing to talk about. Well, 2 things. If you're going to set a rating goal, don't get too ambitious, and if you feel like you might not be able to reach that number, then maybe adjust your goals a little. And on the topic of people rating an obscene number of books a month, I feel it's very easy to start comparing ourselves to other people. Not just on the reading front, but in other parts of life as well. And I feel like that can absolutely contribute to the self-destruction I mentioned earlier. If you try to be like someone else and sacrifice yourself and your mental health in the process, that's not only gonna be disappointing to yourself, but honestly, being something you're not is kinda boring. Just be yourself and set reasonable goals for yourself, because that's hot. Not sure how much more I can say without getting too redundant or preachy, but that's the story of how I nearly destroyed and then recovered my love of reading. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for sticking around. If you want more drawings and book talk from me, make sure you like and subscribe and follow me on my social medias. You never know what kind of premium meme content you'll find there. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. And enjoy the rest of the Speedpaint.